Good afternoon and welcome to the Expert Institute Strategies for Facilitating Construction Claims. I'm your presenter, Derek Graham. Today we're going to be discussing different types of claims, claim avoidance, the experts that help us in facilitating construction claims, the process of claim preparation using your expert, and the process of litigation and mediation, again, with your construction expert. By way of introduction, I'd like to introduce some keynotes about my experience in the industry. I've been working 30 years. I started out with a shovel in Florida, worked my way up through the ranks to the executive level in New York City, and now I'm an independent consultant in Westchester County, New York. I'm including my timeline, a graphic background, my experience beginning in 1982, and I draw your attention to the fact that I have practical field experience as well as administrative experience, a good blend for an expert, which we'll talk about further on. More about my background, my top of my CV. You see my background in British literature and some publications, as well as some current blogs that I maintain at my website, as well as LinkedIn Pulse. A lot of interesting content for legal and construction professionals can be found there as well. More of my CV, my current position, my previous positions, which range from high-end residential construction all the way through infrastructure and rapid transit, as well as institutional and health. Last but not least, my publication, Managing Residential Construction Projects, Strategies and Solutions, published by McGraw Hill, New York, 2006, is a helpful text in reading background about construction and the process. And finally, our main topic for this afternoon, strategies for facilitating construction claims, which includes the topic of preparation, avoidance, and execution in the event of a claim, as well as the facilitation of litigation and mediation. Here with today's agenda, some of the topics we're going to be discussing. Subsequent to our introduction, the various entities and parties involved in construction conflicts and litigations, best practices for avoidance of a litigation, the types of claims that might come up or arise in a litigation or conflict, the management of experts and using experts to facilitate your claims, preparing your claim, preparing for mediation, preparing for litigation, and finally, a conclusion and followed by a discussion of the various elements of today's agenda. Before we get started, I'd like to point out a quote I read from Abraham Lincoln regarding litigation. Abraham believed that it was a poor return of investment and that there were no winners. And I tend to agree with that. The reasons being that often avoidance outweighs the cost and the grief and the return of investment that you typically experience in litigation. In other words, a settlement is almost always more palatable than a long, prolonged, and expensive litigation. Now I'd like to discuss the various entities involved in the construction litigation process. There are several entities, and they all have a different distinction. To begin with, we have private owners and individual owners. These tend to be more uneducated in construction and, as it were, more idiosyncratic client that requires more coaching and hand-holding than, say, your contractor or a commercial owner who builds all the time. Then we have our class action groups, which may pertain, for example, to a condo where all the concrete decks are rotting. They might get together and join a claim on a large-scale defect. We also work with developers, insurance adjusters, contractors who have claims against their clients and their owners, and these comprise the major parties that will be involved in the process. To begin with, I'd like to discuss the idea of prevention. I believe that prevention, for the most part, will alleviate the need for litigation. The biggest reason for litigation has to do with failing to prepare for your case. By that I mean educating the client as to the mechanics of the contract, the process, and the building construction. As pertains to litigation, there are certain pitfalls to look for and best practices to avoid them. I like to call these pitfalls. The number one are riders and amendments to standardized contracts. Such clauses create lots of misunderstandings down the road and may be difficult for a judge or a mediator to interpret. Another less obvious but no less problematic issue is the relationship between parties. For example, if the architect brings in his own contractor, the owner has no way of checking and balancing the relationship between them to understand that he's getting the best product, as they're in, as one might say, cahoots with each other. Alternatively, architects and owners also tend to rely on the contractor's third man out. These relationships and the conflicts within them can largely color conflict and possible litigation down the road. Occasionally, an owner will have his own rep. This may be a mixed blessing because an owner's rep is not necessarily someone with construction experience, and what they say may be taken with a grain of salt. The third measure of avoidance has to do with safeguards. There are certain best practices one can establish to avoid the eventuation of litigation, but to be prepared in the event that it does happen. This pertains to proper documentation, minutes, progress meetings, scheduling memos, job reporting progress, and having that all documented. Insofar as best practices, the construction process, and an attorney's representation of his client, I believe that the attorney should be established early and execute the contract with the opposing lawyer. Additionally, I believe background checks should be made of the contractor, and it would be appropriate for the client to visit past works by this contractor. Subsequent to the contract, typically the lawyer peels off and the job gets built. I believe the lawyer should be kept on task during the construction process to help the client manage his project. Such things as the contractor flagging in progress or not performing due diligence or in a workmanship-like manner can be flagged by the attorney early on, and measures can be taken to curtail it. As a measure against errors and omissions, an expert can be retained to review the plans and determine if there are errors and omissions, as well as a degree of constructability. This is a checks and balance that many clients fail to observe, as they tend to focus too much on the contract and his price, forgetting that the architect also has a responsibility. In this slide, we'll discuss different types of construction claims, chiefly defects, delays and disruptions, errors and omissions, and accidents. As pertains to defect claims, there may either be a defect in workmanship or defect in the material used. A defect in workmanship, your expert may be a tradesman or an architect, whereas a defect in the material, your expert may be a tradesman, an architect, or the manufacturer's representative. Construction delay is by the general contractor. A delay claim might involve carrying costs for the owner. A construction expert typically does not opine on construction costs. However, he may be called upon to generate a delay claim. This is typically done with the assistance of a scheduling expert. The medium is a critical path method created scheduling. This is one method of delay claims accepted by the courts. Alternatively is a disruption claim, whereas the owner has held up the work of the contractor by no fault of his own. Again, a CPM scheduling expert should be retained to represent the delay. The next type of claim I'd like to discuss is errors and omissions, which pertains to the architect's responsibility to deliver a comprehensive design. In fact, architects must carry EO or error and omission insurance. A project design can be examined for its constructability, and a report can be generated by an expert. as well as a seasoned general contractor. In addition to the architect's responsibility to design the job completely, the architect is responsible to monitor and approve the progress of the project as well. But you must be aware there are some gray areas pertaining to errors and omissions that we struggle with. This pertains to the shop drawings or the measured drawings that would not normally be issued by the architect. In some cases, the architect expects the contractor to effectively design the job, whereas it's in reality his responsibility to design certain elements. Last but not least, I'd like to discuss construction accident claims. Construction accidents tend to be reliant on testimony from the people that were involved in it, as there is invariably the ability to inspect the actual site, as by the time most claims come to court, the site is no longer available for inspection. In addition to the testimony, OSHA rules and OSHA reports for the site may be utilized. In this slide, I've prepared a graphic that gives one a better idea of all the elements that might make up a construction claim. Begin with standard of care, which pertains to the contractor's general prosecution of the work, or how he conducts building the project, in what shape or form, and the quality and timeliness of the work. This also includes general conditions in administration, such as documentation, billing from the office, as well as taking care of the site and keeping it in good order, clean, and safe. Finally, at the end of the job, closeouts and warranties must be executed in a professional and thorough fashion. The second type of defect I'd like to discuss is constructability. Were the architect's drawings able to be prosecuted to deliver a complete job? If they were not, perhaps there's an error and omissions claim. In other words, as it was delivered, the project was not able to be built according only to the architect's drawings. The next claim is the most common, is contract compliance. Was the project built on time and within budget? Additionally, there are many clauses in contracts that are boilerplate or may appear to be overly stringent. Many owners and attorneys do not elect to enforce those restrictions or to the letter of the law. It's up to the attorney and the client to make a decision as to what they will enforce and what they won't. Lastly, as we discussed in the last slide, workmanship defects and delays and disruptions are essential parts of the claim process. A claim may include claims for all five such eventualities, hence the diagram with the central claim circle. In this slide, I'd like to discuss the various sources of experts that might help you in assisting you in your claim. There are design professionals, such as architects and engineers, and then there are construction experts, such as tradesmen and general contractors. There are also architectural as well as construction consultants that will help you with your claim. Your job is to determine who's the best one for the case. Some have more technical prowess where practical prowess is needed, and vice versa. You need to vet your case and interview your expert and decide who's going to be the best expert for the project. For example, an architect or an engineer can advise best as to design and constructability, but so can a construction expert, who can also advise on other aspects that the technical or design professional can't. In this slide, I'd like to discuss various aspects of consideration of your expert selection. Experts have different strengths and weaknesses, all which must be thought about in terms of finding a good fit. The first that comes to mind is practical experience, that is, in the field, working the tools. This sort of expert could opine on workmanship, for example, or a construction detail. The next qualification I'd like to discuss is theoretical. Does the candidate have good technical knowledge, or does he hold a degree? That may be useful, however, if it's a defect claim, he may not have the requisite field experience to make the distinction. It's up to you to decide who's going to be the best expert, the practical or the theoretician. The next important qualification for your expert are his written skills, or his ability to make simple, compelling arguments in user-friendly language. In my experience, the educated expert is better at writing reports than is the uneducated expert. Next comes the expert's ability and experience in testifying. How eloquent is he or able to convey arguments? How does he handle questioning and cross-examination? All of these are vital considerations in selecting someone who's going to present your argument in a professional and eloquent fashion. Next, does your expert have publications, books, white papers? These all lend credence to his testimony and also where he can speak from his own experiences. And finally, integrity. It doesn't matter if you're a practitioner or theoretician, if you lack integrity, your argument is not going to be useful to your purpose. Your expert should be able to speak with conviction and be able to be respected by his audience. In this slide, I'd like to discuss the various elements of case preparation. Believe it or not, the first step of case preparation lies in the avoidance of it. Nobody wants to go to court if they don't have to. This includes being diligent with your paperwork and keeping proper records of all documentation pertaining to the project. Once your claim is established, it's time to begin a strategy. The first point of the strategy is to elect a captain, or the central point for the claim facilitation. Typically, the attorney is the de facto captain. The attorney knows what arguments he wishes his expert to demonstrate and give his opinion on. However, it's often the expert who's in the best position to be the captain of how he will demonstrate the attorney's points. This may include involving other experts or other opinions. It's the captain's responsibility to keep this at a central and cohesive point. Once a strategy is established, the expert can provide expert insight as to what sorts of arguments will support the attorney's claims and what other arguments or new arguments may be entered into the claim. The discovery process is critical to establishing your claim. Your expert should be of great service in letting you know what sorts of documentation you should expect. If you don't ask for specific documentation, there's a strong likelihood that you won't get it. Types of documentation you should expect from the contractor are copies of subcontracts, his estimating tables and quantity takeoffs, his schedules, his submittals and shop drawings, as well as their respective logs, daily progress reports, meeting minutes, emails and correspondence, progress photos, and mock-ups. Subsequent to review of all material and discovery background, your expert should be able to generate a report stating his opinions about the case. A good expert writes as well as he testifies and will include a culmination of all the material he has reviewed. The attorney will review the report and make his comments, and subsequent revisions will refine the report. Best practices dictate that the attorney does not tell the expert what to say, as this may come up later to haunt you in the proceeding. Finally, in this slide, I'd like to discuss actions. Mediation, arbitration, as dictated by the contract, or litigation. To begin with, the first step is the coordination of your claim. This includes preparation meetings with your experts, and close reviews, and coordination with experts' opinions that they back each other up and that they don't disagree with each other. Subsequent to disclosure, it's time to present to the mediator at court a coherent, user-friendly presentation, including your reports, exhibits, all supporting your argument and what your expert will offer testimony to. It's time to put your best foot forward, so form is as important as content. Rebuttals are critical to your argument. My experience as an expert is that many rebuttal arguments are found by the expert himself. In writing a rebuttal, if he writes compelling reports and testifies well, his rebuttal arguments will also be strong and a great asset to your case. It is this eloquence in presentation that will determine the suitability of your expert. Both his eloquence in writing and oral skills are key to the success of your argument. Just like rebuttals, cross testimony is critical to the facilitation of your claim. It's often the expert who thinks up the best arguments to cross-examine the opposing expert with. To begin our closing statements, I'd like to echo Abe Lincoln's comment as regards avoiding unnecessary litigation. Although that sounds antithetical, the best cases are settled out of court. Your clients will thank you. A good expert will influence a settlement and refute the notion of any two experts merely canceling each other out just by showing up. As I said, the better part of litigation lies in the prevention of it. However, in order to prevent it, you need properly executed contract and due diligence throughout the life of the contract. Again, I reiterate that the best cases are those that are settled out of court. Many cases that settle, which describe most of my own, attest to the efficacy of the expert's report and testimony and deposition. If this is compelling, there'll be a strong indication for opposing to induce a settlement. Having a solid expert in your corner can be key to de-escalating conflict before it becomes costly litigation. If your expert argues well, opposing may think twice and induce a settlement. Finally, reiterating what we discussed about finding the right expert for the right job, you want to be very careful in choosing your experts. Don't be afraid to ask for references or to read previous reports so that you can determine if he's going to be the right expert for your case and if he's going to present it well. The whole case may depend on it.